So, well, let me go to the Lord and ask Him to bless our time now as we're going to look at His Word. Dear Lord, I thank You for the place where we are, that we can be in a dry place, in a cool place, even when it's warmer out. Thank You for how You are blessing us. Thank You for the various people in this room, the various generations. Thank You for our kids, and thank You for the people who are involved in that ministry of watching them and taking care of them. And I just pray that You would be with us as we take a look at Your Word, that You would enable me to explain Your Word the way You want me to explain it, and the way it's fit, and the way it ministers to us, and the way it makes a difference in our hearts. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, if you were not here last week, I'm going to catch you up in a minute, because this is our second part. But I want to encourage you, and you might actually, when you hear what I have to say today, you might be motivated to go back. We have my messages are online. When you go to our website, First Baptist of Warrensburg, there's a link to YouTube, and then you can click on it. So this is good stuff, very practical stuff. I just started to talk about last time, and we're going to continue with that today. Now, I want to catch you up with that. We talked about basically the four horsemen, right? Kind of like a picture from Revelation. We were not talking about Revelation, but the four horsemen of relationships that threaten our relationships. I was talking about that study that was conducted, started in the 1980s, a cross-sectional study, a secular study, was never conducted like that before. There were 1,000 couples, newlywed couples, and they were followed over 10 years. And that was the first leg of that study, over 10 years, and they were trying to figure out, okay, if we have people who want to live together in marriage, what are some of those challenges? And they started to analyze those things that would cause some of those couples for things for them not to work out and even end up in divorce. And then they kind of figured out, what are those things? Can we put our finger on it? Is there something that we can say that is showing up again and again and again in all kinds of relationships? That would be those factors, those four horsemen, or those predictive factors. And I want to just, we talked about those last time. I want to just do a run through real quick, a review, and we try to remember them by I knew. So science figured out what they were, right? But God knew it all along. And my point was that God has given us, in His old book that's thousands of years old, He has already given us all those pointers and all those warnings about these things. So it's nothing new to us as Christians, really, nothing new to God, but it's still very helpful what those scientists figured out, and they kind of labeled those four things. And they were saying it has to do with communication, interestingly enough. If people have certain ways of communicating, certain bad ways of communicating, they will be the determining or the predictive factors that, with a likelihood of 80 to 90%, we can actually predict. If people communicate that way, they will eventually get into trouble, right? And so we kind of identified them, and the scientists gave them certain names, and I took those names, and since God already knew, and so we have the sentence, I knew, and the K is a silent K, right? We don't hear it, so we have only 4 letters in there, and I'm going to take you through them real quick as a way of reviewing it. The first one was invalidation. That when people communicate that one person is invalidating something about the other person, that they're putting them down, that they are fault-finding, they're criticizing them, right? That's just kind of our emoji right here. Somehow they're finding something in there. You know, we kind of always try to tie it in maybe with a saying or a proverb. We could say, there, you know, credit where credit is due. That's how it should be, right? But with invalidation is that somebody maybe even is expecting praise, but they're not getting it. And I gave you that illustration of a husband, you know, for once he tries to surprise his wife and to just kind of do something really neat, and he completely takes care of the dishes before she comes home, and everything is spick and span, and he's just kind of excited that, how's she going to respond, and she comes and she sees it, and then she says, well, but you didn't put the brush where it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be on the hook over there, right? That would be an example of how we sometimes communicate. Somebody is expecting to be praised, but they are put down, disparaged in one way, right? So invalidation was the first one. Then we looked at negation, that we could be so negative in our communication that we even think that we can read somebody's mind. And we can read somebody's heart. And we have that X-ray vision, right? We know and we assign motives to what somebody's doing, right? For instance, a husband who's telling his wife, you know very well that it's very important to me that my remote control is always in the side pocket of my armchair in front of the TV, right? But you never put it there, and why you're not doing it? Because you try to get under my skin. You're just trying to get me mad, right? So what was he doing? He's not just criticizing the behavior, which would be fine, but he is impugning the motives. You're just trying to get me crazy, and you're just driving me mad, right? That would be an example of negation. And eventually everything happens then that it ends up in escalation. Escalation is that, tit for tat. A tooth for a tooth, an eye for an eye. The way you shout into the woods, that's our German saying, the way that goes out. Right? And it's just kind of, a good picture is that swing, right? It starts slowly and lowly, and it gets higher and higher and higher, and one person is just giving, contra to the other person. Yeah? Like he says to her, oh, look who's talking. You of all people need to complain about me leaving my dirty socks and maybe a wet towel on the bathroom floor, but if it wasn't for that clutter of your skin lotions and your body lotions, I couldn't even find my aftershave, right? So that's the problem, that we don't even react to the criticism, which might be justified, but we shoot back with our own, tit for tat, right? That's escalation. And then we have the last one that they figured out of the 4 horsemen, that is withdrawal. That is just kind of stonewalling, avoidance. Not even want to talk about the issue. Eventually just kind of, like her, just kind of crying, running out of the living room, slamming the bedroom door and just moping and giving her husband the silent treatment, right? That would be an example of that. Withdrawal, not wanting to talk anymore. Now, I used illustrations from marriage. Again, we're talking about all kinds of relationships. It could be siblings relationships, it could be relationships at work, and when you listen to that, you probably identified it. And remember, I tried to remind you last time that you do not want to hear with the ears, somebody else's ears, right? And that's easy to do because, oh, my wife does it, oh, my husband does it, oh, my cousin does it, oh, my boss does it, right? My colleague does it. But try to figure out, when are you doing it, right? So, and the point where we're ending up, by the way, withdrawal, a good picture would be that turtle that kind of pulls in the shell right there, right? Not wanting to deal with things anymore, right? And then the saying that we could use there is, once bitten, twice shy. Or a bird child dreads the fire, right? And that could be the excuses for that. If I keep on talking with you, we're not going to get anywhere. So I've had enough. So the point is, how can we deal with that? And actually, that particular study, they actually came up with a solution. They said, well, we have to do something in order to deal with our communication habits. Now, before we get into those, let me let you in a little bit in a secret of mine. I have a recurrent dream. A dream that I dream every once in a while. Not very often, maybe I don't know. Probably I'm dreaming it more often, but I don't remember it. Maybe every 5 years, I would think. But then when I dreamt it, it's very clear. And there's always a variation to it. It's kind of like, in my dream, I'm realizing, oh, bummer, I cannot fly like Superman. That would be kind of cool if I just kind of just took off and just, be all over the place and be really fast and could fly. But that's not what's going on in my life. But then I realized somehow that I can still negotiate any obstacle by just, sometimes it's just kind of laying on the floor and then just going with my arms like that and with my feet like that, and slowly but surely I start floating. And the more I do it, the higher I get, and then I realize, oh man, it takes a while, but I can negotiate any kind of obstacle, right? Sometimes it's I have to hold my breath, right? And I'm just holding my breath, and the longer I can hold my breath, the more I can float. And then again, it takes a while, but I can negotiate any kind of obstacle I want to get over. And I kind of think it's kind of neat. It's not that I can fly like Superman, right? Other times it's going to have to wiggle my toes. You know, it's always something you have to do. It's pretty kind of annoying, kind of a nuisance. But if I keep on doing it, eventually I keep getting higher and higher, and I can get over any obstacle. And I don't know psychological interpretations of dreams. I personally think there is something to that. And that's kind of like a reflection of my life. And I'm realizing, you know, I'm limited. I don't, with my gifts and my talents and all that, and even everything that God has given me, but if I keep steady at something, if I'm a steady Eddie, I can get somewhere, right? And this was kind of pretty much a reflection of my life, right? That I have tried to implement that. I want to do something steady, right? Haste is waste, right? But just keeping at it, you know. In Scripture, actually, there's a proverb that I like that goes along with that. Proverbs 25:15, through patience a ruler can be persuaded, and a gentle tongue can break a bone. Now, not necessarily that we want to break a bone, but sometimes, you know, we can accomplish something not with a harsh tongue, but with a gentle tongue, and that patience is the name of the game. And I like there's a modern translation, I forgot which one it is, but the first part is, be patient and you will finally win. And that is kind of the principle that we're going to look at right now. So when we have communication that goes awry, when we have communication that gets escalated and backfires, and we have all those things, you know, withdrawal, invalidation, and negation, and all these things that could happen. Those scientists were saying it is really helpful if we learn to slow ourselves down, if we have some deceleration, if we practice some patience, and if we have certain ways of going about things when we talk to each other, especially when we get to a point where we disagree with each other. Because it's human to disagree. And so those scientists, they came up with a technique, and they called it the speaker-listener technique. And when I heard that the first time, and it was in the 90s, that I was presented with that, and it kind of really helped me, and I found that actually all these things that they were recommending were also found in Scripture. There are very valid reasons why we should actually speak to each other that way. Now, first of all, I want to explain to you that this is really almost like an emergency brake when people have a hard time communicating and it just comes to a breakdown, or we're just about to break down, and there's a way to apply yourself and to apply rules into your relationship that will really help, right? And so they're a little bit strict, and I'm going to explain them to you today, what those rules are. But if you just take one of them, or two of them, or three of them, and even if the person that you're dealing with, your partner, doesn't even realize that you're doing it, there's still something to be gained by that, still something to be won, because you can, just by basically being an example and doing something, sometimes it helps that the person just realizing it's catching on what you're doing, and you kind of pull into that. And I found that in our marriage. Now, we are not by any means the best communicators with each other. No, my wife she's shaking her head, you see that, right? So we needed that. So we needed that in the early 90s when we were taught that. Then you kind of tend to forget, and then you kind of tend to remind yourself. And then it is really helpful to have those principles. Now, first of all, the first thing is, do we all agree that those four horsemen are bad for us? And hopefully, if you were here last week, and if you just heard it for the first time, you realize, yeah, that's bad stuff. That's poison for relationships. If we communicate like that, So there's this first commitment that we have to make. I want to get rid of these things. I want to commit myself not to communicate like that anymore. You know, of course, whenever we make a commitment, we are already bound to fail in it, but we want to head in that direction. And then when it happens again, we have to repent, brush off, you know, and then keep on going with doing the right thing. That's the first thing. So those 4 horsemen, they're bad. We want to ban them out of our lives. Now, how do we do that? We do that with a speaker-listener technique, and I'm going to explain it to you. Now, the goal, and this might be confusing at this stage, because we're talking about conflict sometimes, right? Conflict can get us there, right? And sometimes it's everyday things in life, and then they kind of bring us to conflict. Now, the goal is not conflict resolution right away. Eventually it is. But with this technique, it's not conflict resolution, but understanding what the other person says without necessarily me agreeing with them. Right? And it almost sounds like a little bit of, you're trying to wiggle you out, no, but that's how life is. When people come together, there are different opinions. And sometimes we get so riled up about somebody not agreeing with us that we get all upset. Right? And then we think that we understood that person, what they were saying, and sometimes we don't. Right? So the point is to kind of decelerate, to slow down enough to actually understand what the other person is saying and allow them to hear from our mouth what we think, what they were saying, and then they can agree with what they actually said, or they can correct us. Right? Now, let me get into it and explain it to you this way. Now, we have, as a matter of fact, I'm going to point that out to you already now, at the exit today. My wife and my daughter worked really hard to laminate little mouth and ear cards for you. They are laminated, and they're basically a summary of my message today. Now, I would encourage you to take one home, at least one per family, couple, whatever, but there should be almost enough. I made 50. Take them home. And we're going to say a little bit more about that later, all right? And my wife and I, when we were taught that many years ago, we didn't have a card like that. And actually, the way I always do it, I make things a little bit more memorable. At least I try. Sometimes you might be annoyed with that, with my little mnemonic games and aids, but it helps me, right? So we didn't have anything like that, and sometimes it was just an object. Maybe it was a bunch of keys, or it was a remote control, or something that we designated it. This is actually the mouth, or this is the floor, you could say. The person who has that in their hands, they have the mouth. Or they have the remote control, or whatever it is, a bunch of keys or remote control. That person who grabs it, and sometimes we had something on the, now I do remember now, we did have a magnet, something, we had it on the refrigerator, and sometimes we were running when we had an issue where we realized, okay, somebody wants to say it first, because the person who has a mouth first, they're kind of the master. They have an advantage, they have an edge on the other person, right? Because the mouth is a person who has now the privilege to speak. And there's another side to that card. By the way, you just have to take one card, and it's on both sides, and there's an ear. The ear person is basically the slave or the servant. Let's say the servant of the master mouth, right? And the point is, whoever has the floor, whoever has the mouth, they can express their thoughts and their opinion. Now, whoever is the ear, they are a servant to the mouth. Their job is not to come up with their own ideas and to counter those ideas at that point when they have that role of ear. Their job is to make sure that they understand what the mouth is saying and that they paraphrase things and that the mouth is satisfied that what they have understood is exactly what they were really saying. That's basically, I'm summarizing for you. So now, I have a way of remembering it, if it helps you, ribs. That's just kind of works out. I don't know how to, when you remember a husband and you look at your wife, you realize, oh, two of my ribs or a pair of my ribs are over there, right? And your wife looks at your husband and she says, oh, most of the ribs are over there. That's where I got them from, in a tongue-in-cheek, the tongue-in-cheek way. But those letters work out. To remember those 4 things that you have to do. You have responsibilities when you're at the mouth. All right, so let's look at them. You're not going to take them in order. I'm going to take them in a kind of logical order. The first one is B is brief. That means whatever you want to communicate, whatever your opinion is, whatever your point is you want to bring across, you don't want to keep on talking and talking and talking and talking, but you want to keep it brief. Just like, not like the husband who said, I haven't talked to my wife in 3 weeks. Wow, why? I didn't want to interrupt her. Right? So not that kind of brief, right? Really brief. So, and it's kind of hard to do. It is much easier to say things with many words and all over again. So it's important to break it down and keep it to one point and one thought and keep it brief. Now Woodrow Wilson, President Wilson, was asked once, Mr. President, if you had to prepare a 10-minute speech, how long would it take you? He said, well, a 10-minute speech, 2 weeks. Or what about an hour speech? Well, I can do that in 1 week. Or what about a 2-hour speech? He says, I'm ready now, let's go. Right? Because it's easy to use a lot of words. It's easy to use a lot of words. It just we don't have to prepare for that, but it's hard to just kind of hone it in and do some wordsmithing and really even think, how can I put that in a nutshell? Now, Scripture talks about that in Ecclesiastes chapter 10, 13 through 14a. At the beginning their words are folly, at the end they are wicked madness, and fools multiply words. So if we are not disciplined with our words, we are fools. Now you're talking, oh, look who's talking, pastor, who always preaches until after 12, right? Believe me, I always try to economize my words. Sometimes I manage to do that, sometimes I don't. But it is a virtue to try to work on that, right? Not to keep on, sometimes repetition is good. You know that I sometimes repeat my points. But in that context, it's important to be very concise and to be very brief, right? The next thing is, interestingly, you're supposed to make I statements. And you go like, why I statements? Don't we think of ourselves already enough? Because that's what life is about. Me, and I, right? Well, it's actually true. Actually, there's an Oxford way, I forgot what they call it, but a way of getting the statistics, and the word I in the English language ranks 10th. So it's really up there. So we use the word in everyday life all the time. I, and me. I don't know whether they counted me in that, but I think it's just I. And then you, interestingly, it's almost further down, it's like place 18, I think it is. Right? Rank 18 is you. So in everyday life, we're thinking normally, because we're selfish, we're thinking about ourselves, and we're just giving our opinion, I. But guess what? When we are fighting with somebody, when we have a disagreement with somebody, we don't hear the I. What do we hear? You, and it becomes very accusatory. It's interesting, right? So all of a sudden, it's all about the other person, because we are not at fault, it's them, right? You. That's why you want to be very proactive in making I statements. Like statements like, I feel, or I have the impression, and that would be a good way even to be a little bit more subjective. What you're trying to tell the person who's listening, this is my opinion. This is the way it comes across to me. Even when they say, I feel that it's hurtful. It feels hurtful to me when you do this or that. It's a little bit less force than to say, you're hurting me when you do this or that. When you bring yourself into the picture, there is a little bit of subjectivity that kind of helps the other person to listen to what you're saying. Colossians 4:6 puts it this way: let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. So that would be a good way to remember to talk to somebody. I feel, or I have the impression. And then we kind of put it in the context of, I might be wrong about it. because that's a feeling, that's an impression that I have. Very helpful, very helpful. And then we also have in Matthew 7:1 that would go into the same vein here, do not judge or you too will be judged. Again, if we are a little bit in a roundabout way, it takes the judging edge out a little bit. Now, certainly I can't get into this passage when Christ says do not judge. He's not saying that we should never ever judge, period, but he's talking about judgment in a certain context, unjustified judgment. There's some justified judgment, and basically bring it down to the point is, I already mentioned it last time, we can judge people's actions. If it's really objectively, this is what they did, we can judge those, but we never ever want to judge their motives and think that we know what their motives are, unless they told us. But even sometimes people tell us something when they are mad, and they don't even really mean it, right? So we want to be very careful in judging their motives. And then the S stands for share. You know, you're supposed to not to then hold on to the mouth. Now you are allowed, according to the rule, to hold on to that mouth for as long as it's necessary that you think you need to get your point across. And I know you don't have the whole picture yet because something is happening in between, because the ear is going to be responding. And I think the more I'm talking, the more you get the idea what's happening here. But you're supposed to share. You are supposed to afford the other person to be the mouth. And then you turn around the card and you become the ear. Now, why is it a biblical principle? Mark 10:19, you shall not defraud, Jesus said. Interesting passage right there. He's talking to the rich young ruler, and it's kind of in the context when he's already saying, hey, you were told this or this, but I tell you. And basically what he's doing, he puts a stricter, a higher standard on the law. He says sometimes the letter of the law, the Ten Commandments, it looks like if you're really rigid about it, oh, you only have to do this. And then he says, but you actually have to include this also. And this is interesting because you shall not defraud doesn't show up in the Ten Commandments just like that. But he's replacing it, and what actually was in there is thou shalt not covet, or you shall not covet, right? And coveting is that, and then in the context is, covet your neighbor's wife, your neighbor's house, your neighbor's cattle, or whatever, right? So coveting is that I'm greedy, and I kind of would like what they're having, that I'm jealous and I'm envious, and my thoughts revolve around that, and they dwell on it, and maybe I even plan to get what they are having, right? That's what coveting is. But defrauding is actually, it's kind of implied by the same thing, but it's the other end, right? When I have something, but I'm holding on to it in a very greedy and a coveting way, but maybe I should share it with the other person. And certainly in a context like that, it would be very selfish for me to just, I want to get my point across, my partner, no, he has to listen. The next 3 hours he has to listen to me. I have the mouth. Now, according to the rule, you have to voluntarily share it, but you should share it. Now, here's another biblical principle to that. Luke 6:31, and that makes sense to everybody, right? Do to others as you would have them do to you, right? So you eventually, you want to get your point across with that person, so you don't want to be the servant all the time and always have to paraphrase what they're saying and get corrected by them, and you have to say it again because that's where we had it. But you want to get your point across too. That's why you want to treat that person in that way. So you want to voluntarily, at some point, get the feel for it. Oh, now it's a good time that we should turn that card around, and now you are the mouth over there, and I am the ear, right? And then the last one, you could put that in parentheses. It doesn't have to happen, but it could possibly. Time out. Now, time out is when we think, we've been talking for a while right now, and it looks like we're not getting anywhere with this. And I'm getting really annoyed. And I think I'm losing it. I have this filter right now that I'm just really about to lose it, and I cannot keep on going. And then there is this way out with that rule here that you say, you request of the other person, hey, can we take a time out? Can we table this for now? Not talk about it for now, right? And here's a rule that you request it, and I'm just already going to anticipate that the other person will have to grant that, will have to allow it. But the rule is only the person who has a mouth can ask for that. Because you're an advantage, right? And when you're at an advantage and you want to just say, listen, I cannot talk anymore, you can do it in your position as a mouth, but you cannot do it as an ear. And I'm going to explain it a little bit from the other side in a minute. So, if you cannot keep on going, that doesn't have to happen, you want to ask for time out. And here's another rule. The person who asks for a time out has to be the person who voluntarily brings it up again at another opportune time. Maybe the next day, maybe 2 days, maybe a couple hours later. That is the implicit rule that you have to agree to. If I call a timeout because I'm withdrawing now, right? I don't want to be the one who stays in my shell, and I don't want it to be the responsibility of the other person to now pursue me and just say, let's talk again. I have to bring it up again. All right. So there we have it. Here's the Bible passage with it. In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry. That's the biblical principle we looked at last time also. Because if anger is just starting to develop in you and you feel it, you just want to keep it in check, right? So you do not want the sun to go down over your anger. So you might want to stop a little bit early on. This one is great here, Proverbs 7:14. Starting a quarrel is like preaching a dam. So drop the matter before a dispute breaks out. So if you feel, we've been doing it for a while, it's not really helping us in this particular instance, maybe I should call it timeout. That would be actually following this wisdom of this proverb. Starting a quarrel is like breaching a dam. You don't want that dam to be breached. You don't want the water to just kind of gush out, right? Because everybody is going to drown. So drop the matter before a dispute breaks out. But again, remember, it's your responsibility to bring it up in due time. All right, so there we have it. Ribs, right? Request timeout if it's necessary. Make I statements. I feel, I have the impression, and then the you comes in there at some point, right? By starting with I. Be brief, and make sure that eventually you share the mouth. All right, going to come to the second one. We're going to come to the ear now. If you're the ear, the poor soul who starts off being the ear, you have to serve the mouth, right? So, and I have the word here, trap. Maybe you can think of it this way, you want to shut your little pie hole, your trap, right? Now, that's not really strictly speaking, you are an ear, but you're still using your mouth not to express your own thoughts and your own opinions, but to express the points that the other person was making. So you're still talking, right? But you're serving the other person. Trap. Now, the T stands for tune in. Listen. Your job is to listen, right? And that's why we're given 2 ears and 1 mouth. We're supposed to listen anyway, more often. James says in 1:19, my dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Again, the principle is to decelerate, to slow things down, to make it maybe even a little bit inconvenient, because it's hard and it's just cumbersome, but it's a good thing, right? Listen, tune in. Now, the R stands for refrain. Refrain from something. Now, what are we supposed to refrain from? Refrain from preparing a response, because that's normally what we do, right? Somebody is doing this, they're moving their mouth, they're talking. I do it all the time, I have to confess that, right? I hear people talking and I already prepare my response. That's maybe one of the most things where my wife has to say, listen, Joe, you didn't even listen to me. Did you even hear what I said? Because she says something and I springboard off it and I have an idea, and sometimes even I think, it's just kind of a good conversation starter, and she hasn't even made her point yet, right? So we have to learn to listen. And that's very deliberate. So refrain from when she says something, and I roll my eyes and I disagree with it already and already prepare, this is what I'm going to say in a minute. That's very hard not to do, but you're not supposed to do that. We have to learn to do that. Just really listen, what is she trying to say, what is he trying to say, right? Luke 6:31. Again, do to others as you would have them do to you. You want others to listen to you, right? You want to get your point across. So it just kind of makes sense that we start listening to the other person. To answer before listening, that is folly and shame, Proverbs 18:13, right? Man, I'm guilty of that a lot, especially in my marriage, It's folly. It's foolish to answer, to have an answer already prepared, a stock answer or whatever, before I have really listened. Now, the P down there is to paraphrase. When you are the ear, your job is, yes, to say something, to open your mouth. Again, it's not to express your own thoughts, but you just try, hopefully, the brief statement that you heard. And by the way, if the other person keeps on getting longer, you're allowed to interrupt them. Listen, can you just keep it to one sentence? And then the person who has the mouth, they have to listen to you too. Okay, they will do that. And just say it in a brief statement, and then you try not to repeat it verbatim, but you do the McDonald's method, right? When McDonald's still does it, and it's, you go through the drive-thru, and then you're ordering, and then they should do that, and most of the time they do it. Then it's, you wanted a cheeseburger with fries and a Coke or whatever, they repeat it, right? They summarize it for you. That's the McDonald's method or the Burger King method or whatever, but it's paraphrasing your own word. And then the person who has the mouth, they are listening to you, and if they think, they are now the arbiter, if they think you didn't get it, say, no, listen, let me say it again. And they're saying their statement again, and you say it now. And, again, you don't want to be verbatim, because sometimes people can parrot things verbatim. You want to paraphrase it. And you know what? It is sometimes so helpful when maybe for the first time in years, a husband says to his wife, by the way, you should use that phrase, I hear you saying that it hurts you when I leave my dirty socks on the bathroom floor. And you know what? Even though he might not at this point be there yet that he agrees that you should stop doing that, maybe he's still stubborn about it, and he thinks he is privileged to do that, but when his wife hears him say, I hear you say that it really hurts you, and maybe he's using other terms, that it really distresses you, and it really gives you a pain in your heart when I do that to you. And then she goes like, oh yeah, you're getting it. Now, he might not even agree with her just yet. No, I'm not saying that he should not agree, right? He should get there, but that is already very helpful, that she hears him or he hears her saying what the other person was trying to say. Paraphrase. Proverbs 15:1, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but harsh words stirs up anger. That's the point right here, that the gentle answer comes in paraphrasing. And sometimes sometimes we are in the heat of the battle, my wife and I, and sometimes I remember, maybe not often enough, but then I say, I think what I hear you say, honey, you're trying to say this and this. And then usually she says, no, listen to me again, right? But then, and it's humbling to do that, right? Listen to me again. This is what I'm saying. Now say it again, she's telling. Then she's realizing, I'm getting to that technique right here, right? So now say it again. And sometimes it takes me 2 or 3 attempts until she's satisfied with that. And it's very humbling, but it's very, very helpful, right? Paraphrase. And then we come to the A, allow time out. Now, if you are the ear and your partner has the mouth, and they're all of a sudden saying, and hopefully it has gone back and forth certain times, that you could have the discussion, and you had this role reversal with ear and mouth, but maybe your partner says, the mouth is in, it's like, I'm running out of time, I have to go somewhere, I'm getting tired, I'm afraid I'm getting mad or angry, we didn't really resolve it right now, so please grant me that time out. And then the rule is again that I have to actually agree, yes, I have to grant that time out, right? But I can expect that the other person would bring it up. But here's the other thing. What if the other person doesn't do it? Right? It would be good if I did it. Right? If I brought it up at some point. Maybe I want to give the person a little bit of time, but maybe, that person needs that nudge, and if they listen, by the way, you called time out, but you didn't bring it up. Would now be a good time that we can bring it up again? Right? So, here's the principle, the biblical principle, Romans 12:18. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Because it takes two to tango, right? Remember, if you were here last time, I used that illustration. A friend of mine who had a roommate, and they had things, and things were escalating, and then the roommate said, I'm sick and tired of it, and he was about to withdraw in his room, and then my friend just kind of grabbed him and just tried to drag him out. No, you always do that. Stay here, we have to talk about it. And then they just kind of came push to shove, and I was called in the middle of the night, and when I heard the scenario described to me, and I didn't know the other guy, but I had to tell my friend, hey, listen, it always takes two to tango. Yes, it was wrong for him to withdraw, probably. Maybe he has a pattern of that. But you cannot force somebody to talk to you at that time. It always takes two to tango, right? So if possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Let that person alone. Give them that time to think about things. Pray for them in the meantime. That's what the principle is here. All right? So, there we have them. The ear. Tune in, listen to them. The R, refrain from preparing a response. Just listen to what they're saying and try to catch on to the point they're bringing across. A, if they ask you for a timeout, you just don't negotiate, you don't try to discuss it. No, okay, I'm going to grant you that timeout. If so, then you do it. And you always want to paraphrase. Always want to use your own words. And it's just, again, it's such a healing effect when somebody uses their own words. Sometimes our own words could maybe even say it better what the other person really feels in their heart. And that is healing already starting right then and there. All right? There you have them. And as you are about to leave at the end of the service, there is an armchair right there, a black armchair, and I have a little basket, a plastic basket on there, and I have these laminated cards. Again, they're the same card, front side and back side. You only have to take one. All right? So I really want to recommend to you, don't leave without one. Take it with you, right? And here's the next thing that I want to offer to you. In that same basket, I have little paper snippets with my mobile phone number on it. It says Pastor Joe's mobile and then my number. And I want to invite you to text me, because this is not enough. It's just explained to you just like the tip of the iceberg. But it's very dear to my heart, and even for my family. I prepared my family. Listen, we haven't even a family talked about that in a long time. That's something that we all need to relearn and redo. So I want to offer you, text me if you are interested to come into church at some point. You just say that you are. You can maybe bring your partner, or you don't have a partner, we're going to assign one to you. But we can have a session, a very practical session, and we can practice that with a topic, an issue that will not lead to us killing each other, all right? So, because it's really helpful to have done that. It's not enough to just hear it, but it's really helpful to do that and to see how other people maybe are struggling with it at the beginning, because it is cumbersome. But it can become second nature. And you can get to the point that you develop that patience. And again, even if you remember it, but your partner doesn't remember, you can actually, by the way you're responding to them in the proper way, you can get them to, oh, that's why we are. Oh, yeah, okay, let's do that. And then you pull them in, and you pull them over to the good side, right? To the light side, not the dark side anymore, right? All right. So I really want to encourage you, don't leave without one. What, are you going to hold it up for people, or what do you?
Yeah, it's right here.
It's right there. So,
is the middle part of your number 741 or 742?
maybe, I think it's 741. What's the middle part?
Yeah.
Matthew? Are you talking about Matthew?
No, 74, your phone number.
Oh, 742. 742. Oh, my phone number,
You
742.
have 741 down here.
I put 741 down? I tell you, I had so many senior moments today, this morning. And I looked at it again because I was telling myself, don't put the wrong number down. Thank you, Stephen. So you remember the middle part, it's 742. Not 741, 742. Oh my. Thank you. So take one, text me, and then we're going to organize it. We might do it at several times when people have time. We're going to meet at the church, and we have several couples here if we get them together, and we practice. All right? So that's where I wanted to end. I'm going to pray in a minute, and my prayer will also include already the grace, thanking God for our meal downstairs, and I really want to encourage you. Even if you didn't bring anything or you didn't know that we're going to have a fellowship meal, please stay. If you possibly can do it and have the time, all right? Just hang out a little bit longer. Maybe there's even some ways that we can talk about what the very practical subject matter we talked about today. Going to meet downstairs in a minute. And yeah, so be encouraged to stay. But if you have to run, God bless you. And remember, we're going to upload this one also within the next few days. Normally it takes 1 or 2 days and then it's online. And so you can refer back to it if you need to do that. All right, let's pray. Dear Lord, I thank you for this, the way your word even works for us in a very practical way, and how there's so much good stuff in there, so much wisdom that we sometimes don't even scratch the surface of. And I just pray that we would learn to even implement some of these things in our marriages, in our relationships, in our sibling relationships, in our father-daughter, mother-son relationships, and in our work relationships, that we would learn to communicate and that we would learn to avoid those horsemen, those predictive factors that ruin things, and that we would decisively ask you to clean up our life and our communication in that respect. And I would be the first and foremost to ask you that for me in my life. And I just pray that you would bless us and as we go into this week, and that you would be glorified in our lives. And we thank you for the food that many hands have prepared, and many different dishes that we can enjoy. Just pray that it would be enough, even for if people stay who didn't bring anything, and that you would bless it and bless the fellowship around the tables downstairs. In Jesus' name.